Welcome back to another episode of the Outdoor Adventures podcast here on Brownfield Ag News. I'm Brent, Barnett. And on this week's program, we're going to be talking about bow hunting white-tailed deer in the late season during kind of that mid to late December timeframe and early January. And joining us now is a friend of mine, Garrett Wood from Northwest Missouri. How's it going, Garrett?
It's going great. Thanks for having me on, Brent.
Yeah, thanks for coming back on the show. Would be happy to have you talk to the listeners about your farming background first, us being the Brownfield Network and the work we do with farmers and ranchers. Tell the listeners more about your operation you have there in Northwest Missouri.
Yeah, we're a family operation. Mom and dad and I, and a local guy helps us as well, and run a couple thousand acres of row crop and about 250 head of cattle. So registered Angus cattle. So we run them, have a sale every year, and we got our bull sale coming up in February. So that's kind of the gist of the operation and all the things that go along with it.
On the crop side of things, what was the 2024 growing season like and the harvest year for you guys?
It was the hardest spring we've been through that I can remember. I've personally farmed for right at 20 years, and it was really tough. We were super wet, and then we turned off on a 40-day dry spell, and then we got really wet again, and then another 42 or 43-day dry spell. So it presented a lot of challenges, but came out with some of the best corn yields we've ever had, and then just subpar soybean yields. I mean, just okay at best. We missed those August and September rains. That was that 43-day dry period was right when the beans were trying to fill out. And cost us some yield, but we probably gained it on the corn side. So,
what was the harvest pace like for you guys? So a lot of the farmers up here where I'm at in, kind of central, southeastern Iowa, most of them that I've talked to said it was the first time in their farming life that they had no weather delays. They just harvested straight through consecutive days. Was it the same story for you in Missouri?
It was breakneck there for a while. With having kids as active as they are, we still hit that rain spell and got finished after that rain spell. But yeah, we flew through it during that 30-some days of no weather. And then, of course, we ended a little slow, but that's just how it goes when you got kids and that many cattle to take care of. You can't just always jump in the machinery right when you want to. But nope, it was a pace this year. We were ready for rain when it happened.
And on the cattle side, any challenges you guys are looking at or anything you're keeping an eye on at this time?
The cattle stuff's been, the market obviously is very good. On the bull sale side, that's a little different, but the cattle has been excellent. We also do a butcher beef program. We do about 36 head of butchers every year, farm to freezer. And that market is phenomenal right now. Not just the market, but the demand of it. People want, farm sourced beef, and it's a pretty good feeling to take that to them as well, and supply that to them. But that market's should be strong for a few years to come here, I would think.
Thanks for the farm updates. We'll get to some hunting stuff now. I just like to check in, see how things are going.
No doubt.
We are entering, we're past the rut, that everybody focuses on in November, obviously. And what's interesting is, as you and I talk here, we're recording on December 4th. We were traveling on November 30th back from Missouri. We were between St. Joseph and Cameron. And believe it or not, there on the 30th, we saw a really nice buck locked down with a doe right next to the divided highway. So that was kind of interesting to see. But, we're at this point now, we're seeing a lot of deer shift back to food. Is this a time of the year that you think, bucks are killable with a bow?
This, for me personally, is one of the most killable times for a deer. And what you just alluded to is you've got those late does and those young does, and then you've got times where you've got your buck to doe ratios off, and not all the does can get bred because, as you know, a big 80% get bred in a 6-7 day period. Well, things can get lost in the shuffle. Does can get missed, and so toward the end of November, early October, or early December, you're getting those does back in and those really young late does. And so you've kind of got that mix of they're pounding feed, they're hungry, and then you still have those does coming in. And the best part about right now is that when you've missed getting the deer during the rut, now you're coming into that secondary rut. But those bucks where you've had the pictures of them and you've got somewhat of a pattern on that deer, you have an idea of where their bedding area is. That's where they're doing their breeding. They're not traveling 4 miles anymore looking for a random doe. They're just getting the does that are coming in late where they like to home at. And so it makes them, in my mind, quite killable when you get in that scenario.
Anyone that drives through the Midwest this time of year, you start to really see them, packed up together in fields in the evening. Do you think, because bucks get so worn down from the heart of the rut that they just wait till, some of these later does or early fawns go into heat at this time to where they can check them, just kind of lazily check them in these feeding areas. So you don't have to, wear themselves down anymore?
I think that's absolutely right. They can just kind of scent check those does while they're feeding. A deer I didn't kill years ago was doing just that. He was out there and was scent checking does while he was feeding and ended up locked down with a really young doe about the third the size of him that next day. So, I mean, yeah, I think they're never going to stop thinking about breeding during this time of year until we're really in the harshness of winter, I don't think. But yeah, I think it's certainly on their minds still coming off of it, but they definitely need to start, re-energizing their fat layer and just trying to get back and ready for winter. So
now here in Iowa, we're about to get a break from archery season because the 2 shotgun seasons will be opening up for a good period of time. But you guys there in Missouri, you can basically bow hunt straight through the month, right, of December?
Yep, there will be an alternative methods, muzzleloader pistol at the end of December. But yeah, from now on, we're pretty well undisturbed in our bow hunting. And so if you can keep from pressuring those deer too much during the rifle season, it can be a really fun time of year as long as you've got the right equipment and you're dressed right and you can stay out there. It typically can be a really fun time of year. And like you said, if you find that pocket of those deer that they're starting to group up, I mean, you can see dozens of deer from the same tree stand in one night. So that gets to be a lot of fun too.
Yeah, the problem is you start putting on more layers and then you realize you didn't, a lot of people don't practice shooting their bow with that many layers on, and their string bumps something, or
Correct.
their peep alignment isn't, right,
Yep.
or anything like that, or the grip gets messed up. So maybe it's a good tip for people to start practicing in some of those layers right now.
A tip I'll give is when I've killed a couple bucks in brutally cold weather, and I typically will throw my stuff on, grab a couple arrows, go ahead and shoot them right before I get in the pickup to go to whatever stand I'm going to, and just get the muscles lubed up and shoot that bow a little bit in that wind and just kind of get it in your mindset rather than going to the stand, sitting in there frigid for 3 hours and then trying to draw it for the first time in 2 weeks. It just doesn't, it's not a great plan for success. So it's not a bad idea just to throw a couple arrows down range right before you head to the tree stand in that bitterly cold weather.
What's worked best for you as far as setups? Do you go with a tree stand this time of the year where there isn't as much cover in the trees at this time? Do you hunt out of blinds, or do you hunt from the ground, or all three?
It's probably 25% of tree stand and 75% from the ground, because the deer are going to, when we start talking about right now, I'm still kind of in a tree stand mode, but we get to where it's just bitterly cold and all they're thinking about is food. It really opens up the ground game because you've got to get to where they're feeding. You've got to find exactly where they're eating at. You got to know the wind. And when it's that many deer coming out, it's hard to get to that spot where they're going to be in bow range, yet they're still going to come feed by you or get to that area without you being so surrounded by deer that they start winding you. So the ground kind of opens that up, just gives you a chance to get into some place, whether it be a briar patch or a pine tree or whatever it is that you need to get that cover. But it's just trying to get out there where they're going to end up at in that bitterly cold weather and let them feed to you. And it can be very successful if you can withstand sitting there.
Obviously people spend a lot of time scouting, trying to figure out, which fields these deer are piling into this time of the year. But do you feel like you almost kind of have an advantage being a farmer when you're out doing chores or checking cattle or maybe doing field work, that you kind of get an idea of where deer are going to?
I think there's no doubt that I do. I mean, it's almost like I'm a deer hunter first and then a farmer second sometimes. Like my dad would attest to that quite frequently. But, I'll have an app open while we're combining and I'll see a spot where multiple rubs, or I can see multiple beds from the combine. Or if you see a spot where they've just pounded the crop down, making a trail through somewhere that doesn't even make sense that there's a trail there, I'll mark that on my app and just keep it in mind for the future for travel corridors and just things that you don't see once the crop's out. And so, there's no doubt. And batwing mowing in the summer and mowing hay and alfalfa fields. I killed a 169-inch deer, the widest deer I've ever killed. I jumped him mowing hay, and then I ended up getting him on like December. It was right before Christmas, December 20 something. And all that started, and me putting trail cameras up in that area and chasing him was all because of jumping him out of the swather. So I would definitely say I have an advantage being out here all day, every day. And, a lot of guys probably see the same stuff I do. They just don't care, but deer just, they take over my mind when it comes in the fall. So
I think that's really cool. You can just like focus on it, like, and keep an eye out while you're doing your farm work too. That's
exactly.
Really
cool. Yeah. We don't go anywhere without the spotting scope and the binoculars in the truck. That way, just in case we see something, we can check it out while we're driving around.
Yeah. What's been your best late season hunting experience?
My top hunt.
Yeah. What's your best memory of late season?
My best one ever was, I think I showed him earlier. This deer here is a 6x5, 191 inches. I got him on December 21st in a -10 wind chill. It was 0 degrees that day. I had that buck patterned extremely well in October. Some people ran some coon dogs into his bedding area, and I didn't see him again. And I was driving home is what I'm talking about. And I just saw a bunch of deer, and I was just wanting to see where they were at. I happened to see this deer going right by one of my tree stands, running back into cover. So I immediately start checking wind and everything for the next night. And the next night, everything's perfect. And I go sit in there, and he was a buck that just was always way ahead of me. But it took those temperatures. That night, I think 12 or 13 does came by and 6 or 7 bucks. And when everything went by and I thought the night was over, I looked up, and there he stood right in the corner of the field, and every deer had walked by at 15 yards. And something about this buck knew that even though no other deer spooked, they were all feeding in the field past me. Something told him he didn't like the scenario and the situation. Thankfully, I was back in the trees far enough he couldn't see anything silhouetted. And he actually worked way out into the field, farther away, where everyone else walked by at 15 to 20 yards. I ended up taking that deer at 60 yards and absolutely 10 ringed him. He ran, and he knew. I mean, when I drew back and stopped him, I aimed near the bottom of his brisket, and he ducked right into that arrow. And he was on alert. He was ready to duck the arrow. And when it hit him, he was getting out of there fast because he knew something really bad had just happened to him. So it was the best experience I've ever had as far as a late season, just because of how cold it was and how smart he was and the number of deer that came by me. And it was just an all around experience. And then he ended up being the largest deer I've ever killed as far as body, and the size of his head was massive. And he was just an old, smart brute. And to get him in those circumstances it's going to be hard to ever top that one.
Makes for a good track job, right?
Oh yes. Yeah. Yep.
Or dragging him out.
Yeah, dragging him out. Yeah. Yep.
Well, hey, earlier you talked about how you really like to ground hunt this time of the year. Mm-hmm. So the buck that I killed this year on November 8th, it was a couple of firsts for me. It was my first public land buck ever. And it was the first deer I've ever taken from the ground with a bow. And I have to tell you, man, that was a rush. I've never experienced something like that before.
And you're right. There's no doubt there's an extra element of excitement and adrenaline that comes to it from sitting on the ground. And most of the time I do it just because strategically it makes more sense and you can get in and out, quieter and cleaner and all those things. But when you try to start drawing back on a deer on the ground, it as you know from this year, it elevates it quite a bit, don't you think?
Oh yeah. And this was year 5 of me trying this primarily, right? There's a couple like private land hunts and tree stands mixed in there, but primarily hunting public and doing the ground game. Man, this was the first success out of 10 or 11 scenarios where I had deer and bow.
Well, I got to give you major props for public land kill. I've never had to attempt that, and I probably wouldn't be very good at it. So
it was pretty eye-opening. And where I ended up taking this buck this year was kind of an area I don't know if I was really expecting anything. I've never seen anything like it because there's a public walkway, like a concrete walking and biking path that goes through this timber. And, there's signs up all around that says, walkers and bicyclists, caution, this is a public hunting area. Seasons are open from this time to this time. And while I was hunting, man, I could see people walking on the trail, like walking their dogs. Someone was walking by. I could hear a podcast on their phone playing out loud. And some of the does that were in this little staging area, they just were watching them walk by, didn't even care if they were there. It was just the most interesting thing that I learned this year.
A pastor used to bow hunt on us, and he told me stories about he hunted in a rural area, an urban area, and he had a tree stand up, and he said it was like you said, a concrete walking path. And he said some of the time those deer would lay down when somebody came by, or else they would just stand there motionless, and it never affected them. But he said, boy, as soon as they saw me walking through the woods, they knew something was up. So I think you're right. Just they know where the boundaries are and where things are normal and where they aren't. And so probably they see you walking through the trees. It's probably a lot more alarming to them than what it is somebody walking on that path. So.
Yeah, and I sat there a couple of times, saw a lot of deer, high deer density area, and I ended up using that to my advantage, and I just entered an exit through that walking path, and it just seemed to work out all right. So I don't know, maybe it'll be a good spot for next year too.
That brings up a great point for the late season stuff that we're talking about, and that's the access, which is vitally important. You saw my daughter got my number one target deer the other day, and we saw him the night before we shot him and the night we got him, and both times we totally changed our access that we had used all season long. And it was so cool to be able to explain that to her, that okay, this deer might have had us patterned, and so we need to change things up on him. And we did that, and we saw him 2 nights in a row, and we were able to take him on the second night. And the access when you have leaves on in the early season can be totally different than your access in the late season. Or if your access is great, but you've been using that same access the whole season, they most likely have you patterned better than you do them. And so it's a great idea to just switch some things up, park somewhere else, walk in a different low spot, do something to change it up where you're just keeping them on their toes. Because access with no leaves on, if you can't get into that ditch or that fence line or whatever you're trying to hunt without everything that's bedded in there seeing you coming, the night's over before it begins. So late season access is probably as crucial as the food that they're feeding on is.
Congrats to your daughter, by the way. And I'm glad you posted the video from your phone on there, because man, that was a heck of a shot. Holy cow.
Yep. She is a good shot. And that was her best one to date. And that's the first one that she's had to pass other bucks to wait for him to come out. And so it was so cool. And now my other daughter, she's going to start hunting, and she did some shooting this year, and she's a little dead eye herself. So my rifle season days might be over, Brent. It may just be all guiding from here on out, and I can just do some bow hunting in between.
Bad day to be a shooter buck on the wood farm, right?
Yeah, the wood girls have an eye on them, boys. So you just remember that.
That's awesome. Well, that's really cool. Your kids are getting into it. And you help guide them through that with all of your knowledge and everything you've learned over the years.
Yeah, it was so fun. It was a memory I'll never forget. So
awesome. Well, hey, man, thanks for taking a few minutes here to come on the show. And hopefully you get one here in the late season, and we can talk about it then.
That'd be great.
All right, cool. That's Garrett Wood again. He's from Northwest Missouri, a farmer and a hunter there, and a friend of mine. And we thank you for joining us here on the Outdoor Adventures podcast on Brownfield. You can always watch our show on our Brownfield Ag News YouTube channel, and you can catch us the audio version on the Agri America app or wherever you get your podcast. I'm Brent Barnett here on Brownfield. Have a great weekend, and thanks for watching our show.